It's Ian from Kicking the Seat, and I'm here with a very belated version of featured extras. This is the Halloween Hangover edition, in fact. Last month was pretty crazy with all the scare-a-thon and miscellaneous horror coverage, so I didn't quite get to squeeze this segment in, but I didn't want to cheat my lovely and loyal viewers, so I thought I'd do a quick-ish recap of some of the extra features, in fact, my favorite extra features from a number of recent home video releases. This is, in fact, my attempt to single-handedly save physical media from an undue destruction. I'm totally humble. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that you're going to see something a little strange during the special Halloween Hangover edition. Because my time is short, I did not have an opportunity to record all of these in one go. So I taped a number of these. Taped? How old am I? Over the course of a few days this week. So you're going to see some bona fide costume changes, aka different shirts and various states of my shavenness on the old beard. So yeah, don't be alarmed. This is just out of necessity, but I wanted to make sure I got as much of this content out to you as possible. So without further ado, let's see what's in these special features goodie bags. First up, we have a film that I can't stop thinking about or reading about, frankly, and that is Neil Marshall's Dog Soldiers from 2002. Now, Scream Factory somewhat recently, this is a bit of an older title. It came out a couple months ago. They put out a really nice Blu-ray of Dog Soldiers for the 20th anniversary. I talked about the film with Chad Hawks, which you can find linked down below. It was an eye-opening conversation for a film that I had not watched in the 2 decades it was out, but now I'm completely obsessed with Dog Soldiers. And that's partially in fact, due to, yes, I'm going to plug this book again, because talk about obsessed, Sausages, The Making of Dog Soldiers by Janine Pipe, which you can pick up on Amazon. But in terms of the Blu-ray from Scream Factory, there's a ton of extras on here, including commentaries and making ofs and all that kind of business. But one thing I thought was the most fascinating, and I wanted to highlight here, is Neil Marshall's short film Combat, which he made in 1999, and which includes a number of people that you see in Dog Soldiers and also who helped to make Dog Soldiers. One of the great things about reading Janine's book is you get a sense of this guy who figured one day he can make a movie, and he gathers a team of very talented and dedicated people that have over the decades followed him on to bigger and greater things. So what is Combat? Combat is just about an 8-minute short film, very unique in a lot of ways. It is about a group of guys who go to a pub. But the metaphor, as you can hear, suggest from the title, is that the dating scene is like warfare. And the entire film, there is no dialogue in it. You can see some of the things, the characters, you can infer them from lip reading and things like that, but it is entirely told from war sound effects. These guys going into the pub, trying to pick up girls. One of them meets, I guess, his girlfriend, and they kind of have some relationship drama. But yes, it's all like fighter planes and machine guns, and very creatively done. It's not just a wall of noise. It's very intentional in terms of the sound design. Yeah, I was not quite expecting this, especially because Dog Soldiers is about a group of soldiers who run into a pack of werewolves. I thought it was going to be more of a monster feature, but this kind of combat is something very different and very worthwhile. It reminds me of sort of the music video for Red Red Wine by UB40, if you remember that one, but in a crazy combat sort of scenario. The one thing I'd like to call out is, for a great example of what I'm talking about in terms of weaving the sound effects into the visual action, there's a scene where a guy wants to settle up with the bar, set up his tab, and he's tapping some notes on the counter. But what we hear are these sort of the Morse code tapping sounds, beep, 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 trying to signal someone that they need attention. So yeah, brilliant stuff by Neil Marshall, and it gives a sense of who he would go on to become as a writer-director. It's at times kind of freakish because some fights break out, and you don't know if the film is going to take a complete left turn. It's very imaginative. It's very funny, and yeah. So check it out. Definitely, Combat is there are many reasons to buy the Blu-ray, actually the 4K Blu-ray from Scream Factory. But the inclusion of this short film, it looks great for, I'm assuming they restored it or something. It's very low budget, but big ideas and big hearts. Is the epitome of, I think, what small-time filmmakers dream of, having something that they put together, a scrappy effort with friends that blows up into something big, and then you can bring people along to have a wonderful community of creatives on bigger and better projects. So definitely a big recommend for me. Now, the flip side to Dog Soldiers is another movie that I talked about last month as part of the our month-long Scarathon, which is The Virgin Suicides by Sofia Coppola. Now, as I mentioned in my review of the film, this is not a film that people think of when they think horror movie. It is kind of a quirky indie suburban dramedy set in the 1970s, and centering on a family of two very religious parents who have five beautiful daughters, all in high school, and tragedy befalls them. Some fine social commentary and satire, to be sure, but also a dark undercurrent of what I would definitely consider horror. Now, Criterion put out The Virgin Suicides on a pretty nice 4K and Blu-ray set, and yeah, I was impressed with it. But like with Dog Soldiers, the fascination for me was the short film that they included on this disc. Sofia Coppola made The Virgin Suicides in 1999, or it came out in '99, the same year as Neil Marshall's film Combat, which we just talked about. The differences could not be more stark. With Neil Marshall's film, you get as I mentioned, the sense of scrappiness, the sense of, hey, I could make a movie and let me prove it to the world. And with The Virgin Suicides, the short film called Lick the Star, which is about a group of seventh grade girls who get embroiled in sort of some, the preteen nastiness that accompanies that phase of everyone's development, I think, to a certain extent. But and it's shot in black and white. It's very nice to look at. You got kind of a talented and capable cast, but you can tell that these are sort of unknown actresses. They all do pretty well. But the difference is, and I hate to say this is my this is the other N word that I really hate, which is nepotism. Now, I don't want to infer anything bad about Sofia Coppola. She has, in the 2 decades plus since The Virgin Suicides, proved herself to be a quite amazing filmmaker and storyteller. But from the opening credits of this, from the studio logo of American Zoetrope, which pops up, and the I think it's the Independent Film Channel, which comes on before the movie even begins, you think back to her father, Francis Ford Coppola, who gave us, of course, The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, which we also reviewed during one of the Scarathon live streams, which you can also check out in the links below. Shameless plug. Uh, we've got needle drops. You've got Peter Bogdanovich making a cameo as the school principal. You know, I have nothing against people using the resources that they have, but especially after coming from watching Combat, we realized that everybody on this was nobody until they became somebody. This was Sofia Coppola's big breakout with The Virgin Suicides, which she filmed Lick the Star uh, around the same time as she began filming The Virgin Suicides. So, yeah, she's definitely putting in the work. It's a gorgeous looking short film, but you also consider, well, why wouldn't it be with that kind of a pedigree behind it? So I'm very conflicted about this short. I was expecting something along the lines of Combat, like, hey, I put this together, with some friends, and I want to prove myself, not just ride daddy's coattails. But I don't see the evidence to the contrary after having watched Lick the Star, which is kind of unfortunate because I was in the back of my head while I'm watching this kind of slickly produced short film. Um, but what can you do? I will say that the story, I think, is pretty fascinating. It's 13 minutes long, so almost double the length of Combat. And the messaging in it, I think the tone, the essence of capturing adolescence and the fickleness of kind of social circles, particularly, this is like just a few years before social media. I think this film would be very different if it were made today. But capturing the essence of how someone can say something wrong, and or say something correct that is misinterpreted, and then it plays the telephone game around the school, and pretty soon a person who had done nothing wrong ends up being a pariah. Especially when that person begins the short film. I'm not going to spoil everything for you, as sort of the person on the top of the food chain. So yeah, it's a very interesting film. If you don't know anything about Sofia Coppola or Neil Marshall and Combat, I'm sure you can watch this short and not have any of the baggage that I brought into it. But I can't, pretend that I didn't have some context going into the film. So make of that what you will. So yes, The Virgin Suicides is now on Criterion. I recommend it for, it's a hell of a film. I also recommend it for Lick the Star, which just sounds so strange to say, but it's also got kind of a fascinating and scary origin as to the meaning of the name. So, yeah, definitely check it out. Next up, we have another title from Scream Factory. They recently released a 4K Blu ray edition of The Return of the Living Dead from 1985. Now, this is a pretty outstanding horror comedy, which I have not watched in way too long. So it's exciting to be able to revisit it in stunning 4K. But one of the featured extras on here that I thought really stood out was a conversation with Dan O'Bannon, the final interview. Now, Dan O'Bannon is a name that you might recognize if you're a genre geek. He was a writer who gave us such films as John Carpenter's Dark Star, Alien, which sort of sprung out of Dark Star, um, Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and of course, The Return of the Living Dead. Now, this interview was conducted a few years ago. Dan O'Bannon passed away in 2009, I believe. So this really is, as far as I know, the final bit of footage that anyone has of him of any significance. It's a fascinating interview about the making of the film. This was his feature directorial debut. He had been mostly behind the camera in writing films, as I mentioned, but this time he stepped up to the plate and got to direct a film, and it was a big challenge according to him. And in this nearly 30-minute long interview, he holds nothing back. It's kind of hard to watch sometimes because he's older. He comes across as a bit of a curmudgeon, and not all the experiences he describes sound like they're a lot of fun. And borderline. There's a tinge of bitterness in some of these exchanges. But what really I think stood out to me watching it is a number of lessons, for filmmakers in terms of how to deal with cast and crew and studio interference and difficult cinematographers and things like that. He did talk about. He describes the making of the Return of the Living Dead as how not to make a movie, but how to manage other people. So it was a big growth experience for him. Talks about dealing with legendary actor Clu Gulager, who was probably one of the most experienced performers on the set, who didn't quite know what he had gotten into. There's kind of a nice little story arc in terms of their relationship, which is quite tumultuous over the course of the film. And I wasn't quite prepared for the ending of this little interview because Dan O'Bannon, I'm sure it was titled the final interview much later on in the editing process, but it seemed as though he knew that this was going to be his perhaps last chance to address the fans. And it's a very heartwarming piece, a complete 360 or 180. I don't remember how that works. From the beginning of the interview, you really see the heart of the man come across. So, yeah, definitely one worth checking out. Sometimes filmmaker interviews on movie releases are just like little, EPK fluff pieces, like, yeah, we're all a family and everything was great, and I love this movie. That's not this. This is a sort of a no holds barred. Very pointed interview that is definitely worth your while. So, yeah, check it out. Again, Scream Factory knocking it out of the park again with a classic genre film, whole bunch of extras. So if you don't own Return of the Living Dead on Blu-ray, and if you have a 4K player, definitely make the upgrade. And yeah, check it out. Speaking of interviews, we've got one of the most unique interviews I've ever seen, especially on a home video extra. That is on Summer of Blood from Factory 25. If you order from Factory 25, you can get this handy dandy special slipcased edition of Owner Tukel's brilliant horror comedy. It's a film about a kind of a slacker vampire in New York who gets into way too much trouble because he starts out the film as kind of a scuzzy human being. But what happens when you give that guy immortality? Well, I talked to Owner about it on a very fascinating and fun 2-hour interview, which I'll link down below. But yeah, so I checked out the disc. And on it are a couple of interviews that caught my eye. They're the vampire interviews, one with Larry Fessenden and the other with Lloyd Kaufman, Uncle Lloyd of Troma. So I had to check that out and see what it was about. And sure enough, the interview is Owner Tukel in his full vampire regalia from Summer of Blood, with the little white contacts with the small dark pupils right in the middle, the exaggerated fangs, and of course the bloody button-down shirt that is open at the chest. And he appears to be talking to Lloyd Kaufman in a trauma prop closet somewhere in New York. They've got like a little setup with microphones on each and camera on each. It's very like it's a claustrophobic feeling interview, but man, is it a lot of fun. And it's not a gag interview. It's not just kind of a prop thing for the Blu-ray. It's a legitimate interview that happens to be kind of fun and random. But yeah, you get a lot of insight into the mind and the history of Lloyd Kaufman, which, if you're not familiar with him, he's a fascinating dude. He is also a great showman and a salesman. I can't tell you how many times he mentions hashtag Shakespeare shitstorm, which is the latest trauma film that he's out producing. And in fact, he was promoting that in Wisconsin a few weeks ago, where my friend Mark the Movie Man Krawchek won the Backbone of Wisconsin Indie Horror. That's a plug for you, Mark. So go check that out. But anyhow, back to the interview at hand. You will learn a lot about Kaufman's history. You would think that a quote unquote schlockmeister, a guy who's made probably hundreds or thousands of low budget, horror and kind of splatter and borderline pornographic movies, it might be some kind of a deranged madman. But no, he's a cultured, well-rounded, highly Yale educated dude, and it's a lot of fun. And Owner in this interview, he is his trademark manic self, and Lloyd is kind of a great foil to that. You never quite know who's messing with who. So yeah, definitely check that out. It's a lot of, as I mentioned, it's fun. I almost wish Owner would interview every celebrity, because it would cut through a lot of the BS you see in electronic press kits and things like that, and certainly DVD and Blu-ray extras. So yeah, Summer of Blood, Factory 25. It's a great film. And this is one of the most top-notch extras I've seen on a release in quite a while. So definitely check it out. Last but not least, and on the subject of slipcases, Vinegar Syndrome recently came out with a 4K Blu-ray deluxe edition of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Now, this is a film that's been released, several times over the decades since it came out in 1986. But I think this might be, and I haven't certainly owned all of them, but this is certainly the coolest package of Toby Hooper's controversial and divisive within the fandom, certainly, sequel. I happen to love TCM2, although it took me several years to warm up to it and to understand it. And one of the ways I came to appreciate what Hooper was doing was through talking and reading other film critics, to kind of kick open the door of what was I missing with a sequel that is very different from Hooper's original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I mentioned the slipcase because if you order from Vinegar Syndrome directly, you can order it through Amazon. I don't think it comes out for another couple of weeks, according to the website. But if you order from Vinegar Syndrome, you'll get it in a couple of days, and you get this limited edition slipcase with this beautiful kind of paint artwork. There's Dennis Hopper on the back, and Bill Moseley on the front, and Bill Johnson. But it's got a nice slipcase, a little gray on your bookshelf. Not only that, it's got a slipcase within a slipcase. There it is. Wow. So yeah, definitely, and it's a nice satin finish on both of them. But I'm not here to talk about slipcases per se. I'm here to talk about the education part of it, the education part of it. As I mentioned, it took me a while to warm up to TCM2. And Patrick Bromley of F This Movie, a friend and colleague here in Chicago, we're both members of the Chicago Film Critics Association. Yes, pinkies up, everybody. He had the opportunity to do an audio commentary on this Vinegar Syndrome release for TCM2. Now, Patrick is possibly the world's biggest Toby Hooper fan, a devotee, and it comes across in his commentary. Now, there are some extras from this release that are ported over from previous releases, but Patrick's commentary is brand new, and it's alongside a commentary from Toby Hooper, which I imagine was pretty great thrill for him. So one of the things I loved about listening to the commentary, which I did all the way through recently, is it's Patrick being his most Patrick self. You can tell his passion for movies in general, his advocacy for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two, and he talks about the why it was so controversial as a concept, the kind of struggles that Hooper went through to get it made, and there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes and historical anecdotes. Not at all a dry commentary, and it's also a commentary from a fan, which is great for many reasons. One of which, as I mentioned, it's not dry, but if you are looking for examples of people who can articulate why a film and why a genre that's perhaps not appreciated by everybody else, someone who can articulate that to present arguments that you should be frantically jotting down in case they ever come up in conversation with people who are like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, ugh, I didn't even bother watching that. The first one was awful. First of all, you should run away from those conversations post haste. But if you do decide to stay and engage, you'll find some hearty bullet points here in Mr. Bromley's commentary. I also love that he brings up as reference for some of the research he did. Yes, research. He went all in preparing for this commentary. He brings up some other resources that I'm actually familiar with. He brings up Cinemophagy, which is a fantastic book by Scout Tafoya, a fellow film critic as well, who actually interviewed on Kicking the Seat when that book came out. I'll leave a link to that below as well. And also Austin Trunick, the author of the Canon Film Guide, Volumes 1 and 2, who I was also introduced to via Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck, the backbone of Wisconsin indie horror himself. Talked to him on one of Mark's live streams a couple years ago. But yeah, so the Canon Film Guide, Volume 2, discusses a lot of Canon films from the 1980s. I think it's like 1,000 pages long. Yeah, Mark and I are actually thanked in the credits at the end. So another shameless, horrible plug. The ego, I can't even take it. I'm surprised I can fit within the frame of this video because my head is so big. That's why I have the camera actually pulled back quite a ways. Anyhow, yeah, so Patrick talks about these authors and kind of gets into his reading of their perspectives and their contributions to the criticism, not criticism, but the writing about and the thinking about Tobe Hooper. So yeah, huge marks for Vinegar Syndrome on this release. I haven't gotten through all of the extras. That's how kind of stacked it is. But if you've never owned Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, or if you were bummed out because a lot of the other editions are either out of print, well, they are out of print, and or are ungodly expensive, this one will set you back a few bucks. But here's a tip. If you order from Vinegar Syndrome, not only can you get that limited edition slipcase, but it's actually a couple of bucks cheaper with the shipping than buying it on Amazon. So that was a nice kind of surprise. So anyway, that's Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from Vinegar Syndrome. I hope you had as much fun with that segment as I did putting it together. Again, I'm a staunch supporter of physical media, and I love extra features. I love it when the studios put out extra features for us to enjoy. None of this bare bones release nonsense, and we had a pretty hefty stack of not only movies to look at, but also supplements to choose from, and it wasn't easy. So yeah, if you're interested in any of these releases, you can check out the links in the description below. And yeah, thank you again. I don't know when we'll get back to doing these. This is the first time I think I've piled more than one movie into a featured extra segment. I kind of like it. So maybe we'll build these up and do maybe a monthly thing. But I've gotten in trouble for saying that before because deadlines, what are those? Anyway, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much for watching the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel, listening to the podcast. If you like this content, please like and subscribe and tell all your friends. And yeah, catch you next time. Again, whenever that is, whatever that is. I got to work on my outros.